So, dividends of the crisis, childcare is essential infrastructure. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm going to quickly introduce this impressive panel. All the way to my left is Allison Salisbury with Guild Education, Lynn Perkins, UrbanSitter, Tim Allen, Care.com, and Jamie Ladge with Northeastern University. And I'm Cheryl Oldham. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Chamber Foundation. And just quickly to sort of set the stage, I guess, we at the Chamber, largest organization representing the interest of business, have sort of been in this conversation about childcare for a few years now. Pre-pandemic, really trying to dig into childcare is a workforce issue, not just for the current workforce, very important work support, but the future workforce as well. And then COVID hit, obviously. And it was funny, in preparation for this conversation, I went back to look at previous ASU+GSVs, and there weren't a whole lot of childcare conversations in the past. And now this year, there's like 5 or 6 or something, which I think is a real indication of, I always hesitate to say a silver lining when it comes to COVID, but I do think we've elevated this issue of childcare to a place that is really important and is indicative of the fact that we're all here having these conversations and talking about it as essential infrastructure. Obviously really important in terms of getting our economy back to where it needs to be and allowing working parents to go back to work. We just got new jobs numbers, and there's like 10 million jobs open, about 1.5 million more jobs than there are people looking. So I think it's time to sort of think about all those barriers to working and to workforce, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to start with Jamie because she has been in this space for a really long time, sort of researching the intersection of work and family, and I thought maybe she'd help us sort of set the stage for the conversation. So Jamie, do you want to do that?
Sure, thank you, and welcome everyone, and I appreciate being able to sit on this panel and to get out of my other world on the other side of the country. So I'm a professor at Northeastern University, and I was thinking this morning of really what this means to me personally, and I have been studying this topic for a really long time, in fact about 18 years, which is the age of my oldest child. And when I went into academia, I did not know that people studied, work and family issues. I certainly didn't know that people studied anything related to childcare, and I was going into a business PhD program, and then eventually, going on to a business school. And so people would tell me from the beginning, and I was studying things like pregnancy in the workplace, reentry back to work after having a baby and maternity leave. I was studying issues around involved fathers, and people were telling me, why are you studying that in a business school? I remember actually speaking on certain in certain conferences and having poster boards and people saying, this just doesn't seem, why are you in a business school? Why does this matter? And I'm like, well, why doesn't it matter? And I kept saying that, and then people would say, oh, you're never going to get your work published in top management journals. These are just not issues that are really prevalent to the business community. And I really, that ticked me off, but I persevered over time, and I listened to it, and I tried to, put it out of my head. And over the years, in fact, in 2012 was when I published probably my biggest research article, which was on pregnancy in the workforce. And I remember the editor said to me that his wife, he shared the paper with his wife, and his wife actually said to him, how come nobody's ever published a paper like this before? I don't get it. And that was in 2012, and now you see this flurry of academic publications which are now trickling into practitioner publications, which you might see in popular press and Harvard Business Review articles and other types of outlets that actually touch the rest of the world instead of academic publications. And now I've moved into studying issues around, right now I have a study going on about postpartum depression in the workplace. And that is something that hasn't been talked about in the business space, in the business sphere. So I'm happy that I've persevered through my own personal journey as my children have grown up. And actually, a couple years ago, I wrote a book called Maternal Optimism. It actually came out about 6 months before the pandemic hit, so it wasn't the best timing, and I think my optimism waned a little bit, but that book is all about the different experiences that working mothers face as they go through the different journey and transitions of being a working parent and navigating especially this care space. And so more recently, and you can cut me off if I'm going on too long, more recently I really pushed the agenda on this childcare is infrastructure debate because we've done some significant research on what's happened to working parents right at the beginning of COVID and throughout COVID. And really, 26% one of the studies that we did, which had 2,500 working parents in it, which was very much a nationally represented panel study, and I know other McKinsey and other reports have found something similar, but 26% of the working mothers in our study had to significantly reduce their hours or drop out completely because of childcare. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know that there are other reasons for why they had to, opt out or reduce their hours or get pushed out, but it's childcare that is driving that. And so I can't say enough about the importance of making this issue, not so much a family issue, but as you said, a business issue.
Yeah. Two reactions that we did some similar research throughout the past year and found similar data points, but one I thought was really fascinating, which was of the 2%, I think there was 2% of men that have dropped out of the workforce, 0 because of childcare, and of the 6 or 7% of women, it's primarily because of childcare, which I thought was fascinating. And then another thing, having a conversation with a very prominent sort of individual in the economic development arena, has been doing economic development across the country in a variety of places for decades, instrumental in bringing, major corporations to his state. And he said to me during COVID, never once in my decades of economic development did I ever think about childcare. He's like, and now it's all I can think about. And so it's just, I think, indicative of this massive shift. So let's go to Lynn and to Tim as well. I mean, I think you guys are both obviously responding with your companies to the care economy and working with employers and parents and providers. I don't know, let's talk a little bit about the kind of employer perspective. What are you seeing, and is there a shift in terms of what employers are wanting to do to provide that support to their working parents?
Sure. Yeah, I think pre-COVID, when we would talk to employers about offering a child care or in general a care benefit for their employees, it was always considered, oh, this is going to be a nice to have. This is what's going to really set us apart from others in our space. And I think now they're starting to realize it's table stakes. I don't know if you're kind of seeing the same thing. And then during the pandemic, I would say one of the trends that we saw was a real shift from focusing on, okay, our headquarters is in XYZ city, can you service that location, to understanding the full needs of their workforce. So, okay, we have a distribution center 20 miles west of Charleston, would you be able to service that? Or 100 miles south of Nashville, and really trying to understand the needs of the workforce beyond sort of their corporate headquarters location, and that wasn't the predominant ask pre-COVID, I would say. And we saw childcare subsidies increase substantially, and now that we're at the point where a lot of them are renewing, we're happy to see that many of them are continuing into 2022 and 2023, and they're realizing, okay, this was a chronic point in time, but this is actually, or more of like an acute point in time, but this is more of like a chronic need that we need to fill over the next, however long our company is in existence. And so there's really a change of perspective on needing this as a longer term and really making it table stakes for companies.
Do you think they're thinking about it from the economic? I mean, it's a bottom line issue now. It's less like, oh, we want to be supportive. It is a,
retention.
It's a retention, and it's costing us money when people can't come to work.
Productivity, right? Productivity overall. I think there's definitely an economic benefit to it, and employers are starting to latch onto it. I think the shocking thing, just building on what Lynn has said, and I love sitting on panels with Lynn, and I'm fortunate with Jamie and also Allison. The thing that I also heard as well, building on what you said, is I've also heard from employers, hey, this is an acute moment of time, as you mentioned, but it's been chronic historically as well, and we just haven't acknowledged it, right? And a lot of employers are going, whoa, this is becoming akin to a health insurance at this point in time for our employees, because they need to have flexible, accessible, affordable care. To your point, the monolithic structure that's kind of existed in the 9 to 5, 9 to 7, drop your child off at a center has blown up. It doesn't work anymore. So now employers are looking for those real flexible benefits and those offerings that can actually help parents in these configurations that actually apply to the individual family and not to the actual caregivers themselves. And I found that really interesting in the economic model, because what I see people doing is, or from an employee perspective, is they're able to take a couple hours here, a couple hours there, where they're working from home, or they may have flex time working from home, and it's also engendering a lot of conversation in terms of returning to work, parents, things to that effect. So it's really just been a knock-on effect and a domino effect overall. If you don't mind if I just tap back to something Jamie said, which I thought was fascinating. You know, as Cheryl mentioned, the new labor statistics came out today, and it's actually 4 million women have now left the workforce. And it's astounding at this point in time that there's still a conversation that occurs in terms of what needs to happen from an infrastructure perspective and the government interception that needs to happen in terms of getting the workforce productive and mobile. In fact, the GDP is expected to take a decline because we're not able to take advantage in the next 30 years of the workforce labor that needs to be there. And to be frank with you, it's women, right? And so I get to take a very unique perspective on this panel, being the dad, right? So I just want to call it out where it is. Because at this point in time, not only does it take programs and it takes offerings such as Lynn or myself, but it also takes the supplementation of having men step to the plate and actually start to take over a lot of what's called the unpaid or silent labor hours that women are having to pick up in the household. So if you look at it, 60 to 70% of those labor hours are picked up by women, with only 30% picked up by men. And if you look at the studies inside of Sweden and Norway and other countries which have a lot of the benefits that push paternity and push a lot of men actually taking on a lot of those silent labor hours, you see lower wage gaps, you see more women who are able to enter back into the workforce, you see higher productivity in terms of women in the workforce. So I do think it's a policy issue, but I also do think it's an employer issue as well. Sorry, I will get off my soapbox now.
No, I want to come back to that after we dig in with Allison a little bit. I want to come back to the policy conversation because I think it's really important. And then also would love to come back to options for childcare. Like, what are you seeing in terms of, I mean, we talk about childcare deserts in places all over the country, but we hear it from our member companies and state and local chambers all over the country that are caring about this issue and are saying, like, what do we do? What are the options available to us as an employer? Like, and I know that that's, you know, a place for you all. But Allison, real quick, Guild obviously works with a number of employers on helping them to reskill or upskill their current workforce. What have you seen, or have you seen any shifts in terms of support for working parents? And then also talk a little bit about is Beehive, right? The on-site childcare, because I know that's one of those things that often is sort of the default, which is, oh, employers just need to open a childcare center on their campus, and that is an option for almost no one, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So our employer partners, I would say, are making massive investments right now in both their talent brand, how they attract talent from sort of across the whole ecosystem, but also then how do they retain it over time? And then the flywheel effect of sort of attracting talent that wants to come and learn and grow with you is really incredible. That people might choose to come and join your company in a frontline role, in an entry-level role, because they know that there's sort of an on-ramp to an upwardly mobile career. And so we just launched a big partnership with Accenture, actually specifically focused on bringing women back into the workforce, and day one, having fully paid for education, upskilling opportunities into all sorts of digital skill roles, with wraparound coaching and advising and sort of one-on-one mentorship with other women. And I'd say sort of all the things that sort of I've learned the past year, especially in relationship to women, but also with Black and brown talent, is the role of coaching and social capital sort of in the experience of belonging. That I think it was a year where a lot of people felt very disenfranchised, very lonely, sort of social capital bonds broke. and the importance of coaching and advising to say, not only can you do it, but you belong here. This is for you. Other people like you are doing this. And so we think a lot about reskilling and about education, but we also think a lot about social capital and occupational identity and the role that plays in bringing women back to work and then helping them be successful over time.
Okay, talk a little bit about Beehive.
Beehive, yeah. So we are a female-founded, female-led company and deeply believe that women and families should have the opportunity to have big career goals and big family goals. We also like to practice what we preach whenever we can. We're always teaching our employer partners around how they can make investments that are good for their workers and good for their business that have positive ROI. And so we launched Beehive. It's a co-located childcare facility, and our headquarter office in Denver serves dozens and dozens of our employees every day. And it's brand new. It was really conceptualized before the pandemic, but I think became an increasingly coveted benefit at Guild certainly this last year.
Wow. Does somebody run it for you, or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we have a staff of 12 at the Beehive, and they're
But it's
really
not like a, Bright Horizons on site. It is.
Yes,
oh, okay.
we run it ourselves.
Got it. Oh, okay. Very cool. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second and look in the audience and say, does anybody have a burning question you have for any of our panelists? Otherwise, I'm going to circle back to this. Well, first, let's talk a little bit about options for employers and provide. Like, what are you seeing in terms of the types of things employers are looking for their working parents, and are there enough options out there? You guys work with providers all the time. Like, do we have enough?
No, I mean, we definitely don't have enough. At the end of the day, like, I wish it was a new phenomenon, not having enough childcare workers in the ecosystem. It's not. 15% of childcare workers left during the pandemic, and they expect only probably about 50% of those to come back. Mostly concentrated in daycares, as you would imagine, but a lot of that workforce has exited because of the way that we have treated caregivers in the past. And what I mean by that is low wages, under-the-table pay, not real benefits, and haven't really scaled up. It's interesting, if you look at the economic side of it, a family of two is actually paying just as much for a daycare as they would for an in-home nanny now, given the pandemic and what has occurred. Wow. So nannies have become an affordable option for them, but nannies have always commanded more, and so you see daycare costs rising because of the fact of the pandemic and because of lower ability to actually fulfill because they have less workers, and so they're charging more of a premium in terms of families going in. Taking a step back, though, what I hear employers saying a lot to us, and I'd be interested to hear what Lynn says, is that we're agnostic. Care is agnostic about the type of care. As long as it's safe and it's quality, we are happy to do in-center, we are happy to do at home, we are happy to do after-school programs. We are agnostic about the type of care that the family's looking for. We just want them to find the right care for their individual needs. And that's what employers are looking for. Employers are looking for not a one-size-fits-all box where you're trying to shove a child into a program that fits for the company. They're looking for, hey, I've got, Disney employees that are working hourly jobs that have flexible schedules who may be working till midnight till the park closes. That an in-center doesn't work for that family. How do we get an in-home that's affordable and someone that can actually come and support that individual worker? Lynn mentioned manufacturing. You've got warehouse workers at Amazon. You've got manufacturing workers or retail workers that are working very odd shifts or different hours. A lot of companies are saying, look, I need the flexibility, the configuration, the adaptability for that individual family, and for you to be able to identify and help them recognize what they need. And so that's what I'm hearing a lot from employers.
Yeah, and then I would just say in terms of actual trends of use, one of the biggest trends we saw during the pandemic was the idea of having a pod caregiver, somebody who would come in and work with your family and a family that you were in a cohort with a similar age child or children. And it's been really interesting to see that actually continue as we come out of the pandemic, and I think it has to do with the way people may or may not be returning to work and looking for a more, flexible situation. And we're seeing a lot of early childhood education trained care providers filling those roles. So people who have been burned out in the center-based setting or the preschool-based setting who are actually making as much or more money running pods of 2 or 3 children. And I was curious to see if that would just be a phenomenon during the pandemic, but it appears to be continuing. We've also seen a lot of families looking for one dedicated care provider who will work a minimum number of hours a week with the idea of like some flexibility in those hours, but a guarantee. And I think that's a combination of both a health and safety thing and also a flexibility piece. And then I would say the other thing we've seen with our employer partners who have very, very remote distributed workforces, we've come up with a solution to help them address situations where they have a very rural employee or an employee in a very small area, and it actually lets them tap into the care community that they're already using, whether that's a family member or a neighbor provider, and brings them into our platform in a safe way that lets the employer provide that benefit.
I just wanted to add to that because I think it's so amazing that there's so many formal supports that are becoming available that employers are, really interested in and aware of. One of the things that drives that, though, is also the informal supports, which is some of the stuff that I often study, and what makes it really difficult for employees to, feel as though they can take advantage of those formal supports without their employers feeling like, or without them feeling like there's some penalty that has to be paid as a result. And so you see that a lot, particularly with working mothers, and worried that if they take advantage of these care options, they're taking advantage of the situation, or they're working less hours, or there's all these stereotypes that are associated with that. So I am a huge advocate for the informal support, hopefully driving a lot of that formal support. And I just wanted to say one other thing about informal support that made me think of something that you said, Tim. There was one statistic that we noted in our study, and this informal support is not just in the workplace, but it's also in the home too. And so when you mentioned dads and allies at home, we asked people in our survey what the most common factor was that was affecting how the childcare was divided in their homes. And so the two most popular answers were employment status, which makes sense, right? And which parent had lost their job or reduced their hours due to childcare. But the third most popular response was who's better at taking care of the kids? And that was before who earns more and who's at risk for being laid off. So there are clearly, these sort of gendered assumptions that are still taking place at home and in the workforce, frankly, that really prohibit either someone feeling like they can take advantage of these policies or, that the organizations, really support them. So I just want to make that point because it's really important.
Very anecdotally, but I just can't help myself. My husband's the primary caregiver in our home. I travel quite a bit for work, and he recently tried to enroll in, we have 2 little kids, in the Golden Gates Mothers Group, which is the largest group for parents.
They're
in the
militant
area.
against men.
They would not let him join. And so if he wanted to find an outdoor playground meetup, if he wanted to know anything going on in the parental community, he was totally shut out. He also feels like when he shows up to playgrounds with our children, nobody wants to talk to him because he's like a man by himself with kids. Surrounded by mostly women. And so I think there is something here. He's like a very confident guy, and he feels like it's not a place where he belongs. It's really quite interesting.
I was only just going to add the same thing happened in Brooklyn with my partner. So literally, he's trying to join the Brooklyn parents group, couldn't join. Gets at the playground, is kind of ostracized, and they have no idea what's going on. They're like, who's the strange man at the park with the moms? And I'm sitting there going, well, this is what continues to perpetuate the normalization of kind of the gender bias roles and what occurs. Can I say one other thing, which is you said something really fascinating to me. I was raised by a single mother, so you said, I'm going to paraphrase, and I don't have the exact quote you just said, which is, women shouldn't have to decide between work and home. And one of the things that my mom actually decided was that she wanted to have it all, raising my sister and I. And there was no formal support from the government. There was no formal support in terms of what you guys are doing at Guild, or there was UrbanSitter or Care, or even the research, right? Mm-hmm. And so she was building a community at home in terms of caregivers, but she continued to progress in her career. She was an ER nurse, and so she would continue to progress in her career, went to DON and did a bunch of stuff. But the thing that I just witnessed and I continue to watch, and what makes me such a passionate advocate from the dad side of the perspective, is that this is not a choice. There should not be a choice. There should not be a mom tax at work, right? There should not be something in terms of what we say from the social norms or even from the government or the employer perspective. We may be getting more formal programs out in society from an employer perspective, but it really does take a shift in societal norms for us to be able to say, you should take your maternity leave. You should take XYZ. And I think that that's when it's really going to be the groundswell. And it's actually I'm more excited now. There's a silver lining to the horrible pandemic. It's this. I see the conversation now in the spotlight when it has been there for generations previous. And I get really excited about what the future can consist of. So I am sorry it went to a soapbox moment.
To kind of add on to that, the one thing I will say about the employer benefit is that we see, if you look, because we have a consumer side of our business and the employer side similar to Tim, and when we survey our users on the consumer side, it's something like 84% of the bookings are initiated by women, whereas on our employer side, it's about 50-50. And we do a lot of sort of like best practices trainings on how to book and hire a care provider. And when we do them on the employer side, over half of the participants are men. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that some of the infrastructure that we're bringing to the situation will help to convert that. I mean, it's a little step. And by the way, when I pitched investors, they would take it to their wives to ask if it was a good idea. So I'm right there with you. But there are little things changing that, you know, I'm hopeful that at this point in time we'll start to see that evolve.
I mean, it's to your point, Tim, it does feel like it's changing, right? This sort of acknowledgement of a crisis, acknowledgement of this really important issue. When I was doing my sort of prep work with, you know, learning about everybody I was going to talk to on this panel, and I wanted to ask you, Lynn, when you first started UrbanSitter, like, people didn't, like, you had a different reaction from investors and things like that, right? It was sort of like, why
Completely.
are you?
I mean, Jamie knows the data better than I do, but something like 70% of employees are caregivers, whether it's for an elder family member, special needs, or a child. And we would go and pitch these investors, and they would say, "Oh, this is such a sweet niche space that you're conquering." And I had many male investors, to Jamie's point, go and say, "Oh, I'm going to ask my wife," and then they would come back. "Did you know my wife does have a hard time finding childcare?" Yes,
Didn't even know.
No. And so, I'm also optimistic. You know, one of the things, you know, we represent a few of the businesses in this category. There are many, but there's still room for many more. And I think that the structure that's funding these entities is also changing, and you're seeing a lot more focus on whether it's women-started companies or any kind of sort of, you know, diversity in the company, focused on, I think a lot of these investors that are looking sort of at a double impact bottom line are now looking at the category. So I think I'm hopeful that the climate for somebody starting a business in one of these categories today is much more welcoming than it was, you know, 14 years ago.
Yeah. And anybody got a question?
We have a question from the audience.
He does have a question. Go. Have at it.
Thanks for all the comments. Can anyone or multiple people talk a little bit about the payment models that employers are using to finance the benefit? Is it kind of a share, like healthcare benefit? Is there other things going on? And how have employers thought about financing?
Yeah. You guys want to talk about it?
So it runs the gamut. Basically, you can have 100% employee subsidy, which is they will pay for the care all the way through to, and some have uncapped hours, which means they allow for any type of in-home care, in-center care, you know, anything that the employee needs or they choose. But usually it's on
up to a certain amount, or
you know, we actually have a few. It's a very few number of clients that actually allow for unlimited.
all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so there are some that allow for that to occur. Then you've got most, which I would say the concentration is they've got some cap of number of hours in terms of either in a center or at home, and then there's some type of copay that's applied for those hours that the employee is then responsible for, but it's significantly subsidized in that regard. And then going all the way back to the coaching. Coaching is such an important aspect of it as well. We do one-on-one coaching as well in terms of everything from doulas, prenatal, all the way through to special needs. If you have, you know, I have a twin son that needs occupational therapy, so we actually use the service to help us find reference and the adjudication and the system and the scaling and all of that. And then for that, it's we basically, the employer pays on a per employee per year basis.
Yeah, I mean, we see the same thing, and I think one thing, this isn't exactly addressing your question, but I think it's something that is going to become more important for a lot of our businesses in this room, is that there isn't like a standard for this benefit the way there sort of is for healthcare. And so we've started talking to companies sort of like good, better, best, because I think when people who aren't already offering a benefit like this start to think about it, it seems really daunting. And we're like, listen, you can start with good. You know, you don't have this built into your budget for this year. Let's figure out how we can help you in the short term, and let's work up to showing you that it will improve your retention. And so good might just be paid access to the platform and a small subsidy that gets you a couple of days of backup care. You know, better is a much more robust subsidy, and then best is you're allowing people to bring on their current infrastructure of care onto the platform to use the subsidy or something along those lines, and increasing the scope of services that are offered. But I think it's really challenging. I know there are other businesses in this room that are either in our space or in adjacent spaces, and when you're going and talking to employers who don't currently have anything like this, they're looking for like, well, what is standard? And there really isn't a standard. I think hopefully we're starting to maybe set some standards, but.
And I think too, we've discovered this in talking to so many folks, employers as well, is they don't, like one really large, you know, fast food chain thinking about this, and they don't know anything about their employees yet. And so that's sort of the first thing that we say is like, do you even have any idea what your employees need? And it may not be on-site childcare. It may be predictive scheduling and some backup care and some this and that. So anyway, we put together a piece this past year that was sort of a playbook for employers to kind of like, okay, if you're thinking about this, like, okay, here are some steps you need to take, and here are all sorts of, you know, I mean, just don't come in and try to, you know, solve the problem until you know exactly what the need is. So let's talk a little bit about policy changes. I think, you know, I just read this morning that the Senate passed a, you know, hundreds of billions of dollar infrastructure bill, and so it still needs to go back to the House, but it doesn't have this type of infrastructure. This is just a sort of traditional infrastructure in the traditional sense. But certainly lots of talk in Washington about a next package that will have things like this. So who has thoughts on what do we need to do to actually be thinking about this in a comprehensive way? I mean, we definitely just had billions distributed to states in stimulus dollars throughout COVID to help with childcare. So there's a lot out there, but would love sort of reactions, thoughts. Jamie, do you want to start?
I mean, I'm not a policymaker, and I don't want to get political on this, but it is interesting that today they did pass the infrastructure bill, and you know, the childcare isn't in there, and I can't tell you how many arguments I had with people because I was convinced it's going to be in there. It's so great. This is going to happen finally, and everyone, no, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So, I mean, maybe that was too optimistic of me, but you know, I did write a book on optimism, so I guess I had to be somewhat optimistic. I mean, I'm still optimistic about it. It's just, it's sad that it's still taking this long and that we have to have these arguments, you know, over and over and over again about something that seems so basic. And you know, I can't agree more that until we start to see childcare like the way we see healthcare, I don't know when it's going to happen, but you know, the tax credit is a step in the right direction.
Healthcare debates aren't easy in DC either, so I can only imagine. Tim, I think you might have some thoughts about
I was just going to add that it's surprising to me we're still having a debate about having paid leave, family, and medical. Then that's like the basic blocks of what we're building in terms of even childcare. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I think that there's a lot of momentum inside of Congress right now to actually finally, in America, as the last developed nation, to pass a government bill in order to allow that to be the case. We're seeing a lot of momentum, and I think that has a good shot, all hopes of passing through, but it is shocking to me that we're still having that basic of a conversation. And then when you transition into childcare, you know, look, there will not be fundamental change to the monolithic structures that were built in the 60s until we really get government reform or government stimulus, I will say as well, reform and stimulus into childcare. And I think that has to be pre-tax dollars for the families. I think that the American Families Rescue Plan, in terms of the deductions that are allowed, should be made permanent. I think that there's a lot of policy opportunities that are out there in terms of reform to allow families to really be able to take their dollars and distribute it to any type of care that they see fit. While this conversation is really focused on child care, I think that they need the flexibility to use it on elder care as well. And I do think that there's momentum, but to Jamie's point, you know, we're going to have to wait for reparations to see if that comes through, and that's a real slog. So I think that there's a couple of areas where I have hope, but I think that there's areas we really need to be advocating for further.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Can I just say one more thing? Also, let's remember what our school hours are still in this country that are revolve around farm hours, and that has not changed. So that would be just a step in the right direction to even get our public education systems in a time frame of the way we actually work, and
I think there's some fundamental, some real political issues that will get wrapped up in any of this, right? Like you've got one side that's, potentially wants, fully government-run childcare system, right? And then you have the other side that doesn't want to get rid of a mixed delivery. And so then when you have those like breakdowns, then, and just Washington is what Washington is, and you can't, compromise is not okay these days, it seems like. So I think to your point, it's really challenging. I think maybe the tax pieces have, permanency around CTC and other things have a better shot. And I think that this shift in sort of understanding that childcare is a workforce issue, I think helps, certainly. I don't know if you have any other specific policy recommendations. I'd be curious.
All I was going to, the only thing I was going to add is it's if you look at the Harris poll or if you look at a couple of the different polls, it's actually an apolitical issue, right? When it comes to the fundamental question of, do we need childcare reform and stimulus, right? 80% of Americans, regardless of the aisle that they sit on, say yes, with absolute certainty. And elder care is actually one of the largest drivers of that, because you have an aging population that is out there voting with their feet and saying, we want help. I want to age in home, right? Which fortunately may end up saving our children as well. So I just want to put it there. I do think the other policy factors that I would layer in is, I do think we've introduced actually, and we're working on the Hill with this, we believe that there should be a similar structure as a 401k where there's a portable pre-tax dollar contribution for families to be able to take from employer to employer in order to apply to any type of care that they so need. And so we call it the Working Families Plan, and we're working with the Time's Up Business Council in order to really push that. We do think that has a lot of legs and a lot of opportunity, because if you think about it, if it's similar to 401k, you can use the pre-tax dollars and it's portable, that really unlocks the opportunity for any type of care that any family needs and not to lose that benefit. And every year right now, as everyone knows, on an FSA or a dependent care type situation, you lose the dollars if you don't use them by the year, which really makes it actually an adverse, perverse impact for what the families need to do.
Yeah. I love that you're doing this and that I'll say this as somebody who works in the education space, oftentimes in K-12 and, advocating for policy changes. Very few businesses join the Chamber of Commerce to advocate on something like this. It's not on their government relations agenda necessarily. And so getting these issues on the government relations agenda of major companies, or not even major, big and small, of all sizes, right? I think can have a major impact. So the fact that you've got a business coalition and that you're working this way, I think is really important. Anybody else? Questions?
One of the ways
Allison,
we've seen that mindset start to shift around caregiving is our employers, because they've chosen to work with us, are very committed to economic opportunity for their frontline specifically. Yep. And when we look across our student population, we have about 3 million eligible students on our platform. We see that out of those who start an application for an education program, over 25% of them who sort of stall, it's directly because they don't have the caregiving infrastructure. And so then we're able to educate our employer partners. You have this goal for your frontline to be upskilled in the following ways, and almost a quarter of them are not able to do it because of the gap in caregiving infrastructure. And I actually think there's a positive story to tell as well. 44% of our students who are enrolled in an education or upskilling program say the reason they are doing it is to make their children proud. And primarily we serve the front line, and so what this is about for them is breaking that sort of generational poverty and really proving to themselves and their family that they can do it. And I think those two things together start to tell a picture around how this is not only a benefit, although it's a very important benefit, it's also sort of a commitment to sort of moving more people from the front line into middle-class jobs, and that's something that we should all care about in a more macro way.
Yeah. Oh, that was beautifully stated. I'm getting told to wrap up. Oh, 24 seconds. Okay, who has something burning that needs to be shared? Come on. One last comment for the group? Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you. This was a fun conversation. Thank you guys for being here.